So what happens when deeply held faith runs up against modern medicine? Today, we're going to dive into the really complex and personal world of medical marijuana, looking at it specifically through the lens of Catholic ethics. But we're not just going to go through a list of rules. Nope, we're going to explore this through a powerful hypothetical story that makes these moral questions feel very, very real. Let's get in.
Okay, so let's picture someone. Again, this is a hypothetical case, but it's one that reflects what so many real people go through. Imagine a 65-year-old widow who has just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Now, while her specific story isn't real, her situation, her dilemma, that's a powerful echo of the incredibly tough choices people face every single day. And this is where our whole ethical exploration really begins. And this is where her situation goes from bad to truly desperate. She is in severe, constant pain. And the standard treatments, the things doctors would normally use like opioids, they've just stopped working for her. Just try to imagine that for a minute. What would you do? She and her doctors are at a total crossroads, and that's what leads them to even start considering medical marijuana.
So this gets us right to the heart of it. As a person of faith, she's not just asking, hey, can I do this? She's asking a much deeper question. What is the right thing to do? This isn't about flipping through a rule book to find a simple yes or no. No way. This is about a deeply personal, careful journey of moral discernment. To even begin to answer that big question, we first have to understand the foundational principle that really shapes the Catholic Church's entire view on drugs. This right here is the bedrock of the whole ethical framework. It all comes down to one key phrase: strictly therapeutic grounds. That's it. That's the core idea. Is the drug being used only for treating a real medical condition and relieving suffering? If the answer to that is yes, well then you're in a completely different moral territory. This chart just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have the use on strictly therapeutic grounds, and that's permitted. But on the other side, any non-therapeutic use, recreational, is gravely condemned. It's a really clear distinction that's based entirely on the why. The purpose is absolutely everything. But here's where it gets a lot more complicated. Even with a clear therapeutic purpose, the Church doesn't just give a simple green light, especially when we're talking about medical marijuana. There's a very strong call for extreme caution. So let's unpack what that really means. This idea of extreme caution is really built on four main points of concern. You can think of them like hurdles that need to be cleared. There's the clinical uncertainty, the psychoactive risks, the potential for dependency, and this preference for alternatives that are already proven. Let's take a closer look at each one. First up, there's a lot of clinical uncertainty. Honestly, the science is still playing catch-up. The effects of cannabis can be kind of a roll of the dice. What works wonders for one person might not do a thing for someone else. And the long-term effects? We just don't have all the answers yet. That big question mark is a huge reason for being cautious. Then you've got two big ones that are closely related: the psychoactive risks and the potential for dependency. We're talking about the impact on a person's mind, on their awareness. Even if it's a therapeutic dose, those effects are a real concern. And of course, the risk of addiction opens up a whole other can of worms, both morally and personally. And finally, the fourth point of caution is this idea that you should favor treatments that are already proven. Basically, go with what you know. But here's the tragic twist in our patient's story. The proven treatments, like the standard opioids, have already failed her. They just don't work anymore. And this is what makes her case so incredibly complex and frankly heartbreaking. Now, let's zoom out for a second. The ethical concerns here aren't just about one person's health. The Church also looks at the bigger picture, the impact on society as a whole. And in that wider view, two huge worries stand out: dependency and the risk of exploitation. The language used here is incredibly striking. Addiction is called a form of chemical slavery. Just let that sink in for a moment. This isn't seen as just a bad habit. It's viewed as a profound loss of freedom, a loss of human dignity. It's considered a deep violation of what it means to be a person. And because that threat of addiction is seen as so serious, the response has to be a total, full-court press. It can't just be about treating addiction after it starts. It has to be about holistic prevention, robust rehabilitation, and serious anti-trafficking efforts to fight the whole system that fuels the problem. And then there's the money. When profit becomes a major part of the equation, things can get dangerous. There's a real fear that sick and vulnerable people could just become pawns in a system that cares more about financial gain than about their actual well-being. It's a risk when you have producers, vendors, and even states via taxes, all with a financial stake. So we've laid out all the different pieces of this ethical puzzle. Now, let's bring it all back to our 65-year-old widow. This is where the rubber really meets the road. How does she possibly navigate this incredibly complex moral maze?
And this might be the single most important thing to understand. The Catholic framework doesn't just hand you a simple yes or no answer. It's not a map with the route already drawn out for you. It's more like a compass. It gives you a set of principles to guide a deeply personal, prayerful, and conscientious decision.
So these are the key questions she'd need to ask herself working with her doctor and maybe a spiritual guide. Is this use strictly therapeutic? Have we truly exhausted all other options? Can we carefully manage the psychoactive and dependency risks? Is this treatment process free from commercial exploitation? And when it all comes down to it, is this my absolute last resort for this terrible suffering?
And so we're left with this fundamental tension, this balancing act. On the one hand, you have this profound call to have compassion for those who are suffering, and on the other, you have this serious duty to be extremely cautious and to protect human dignity. How do we find the right balance between those two? Well, that is the question that's right at the very heart of this entire debate.